Nonsense. Can we take a moment to say thank you to the Greeks and Greece for producing such an amazing amount of literature, mythology, art, culture? Can we do that? Thank you, Greeks. No, I know exactly what this is. I'll tell you what this is. Hey noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and we are starting 2025 with one of my favorite words. Nonsense. Okay, so we are reading on Greek Reporter, and we read, British University issues trigger warning on Greek mythology. Trigger warning on Greek mythology. Okay, for those of you who are here for the first time, just let me tell you very briefly, I'm not here to do politics. We're not here. You will not find any extreme position when it comes to any side of the political spectrum. We're only here to give a very moderate take that will be based on reason, logic, and common sense. With that being said, if I think that something is nonsense, I'll say it. I've already sort of spoken against universities before when they make statements that make absolutely no sense. I've spoken about these universities in the UK that were saying that they actually removed the word Anglo Saxon from modules, the historical stuff, in order to quote-unquote decolonize the curriculum. Nonsense. I've spoken against this specific Canadian university, the University of Waterloo, that when they were policing the sort of terminology that you're supposed to use, in the sense that they were saying that you shouldn't use words such as foreigner, you have to say international person. As a foreigner, immigrant in the United States of America, I have no problems if you call me foreigner, as long as you do it in a good way, you don't mean it in a bad way. The word is fine. Or they were saying you can't say minority, you have to say equity deserving groups. You have to, like they were making it political. And a university shouldn't do that. Not to mention that you have to capitalize the B in black, but lowercase the W in white, which is nonsense. No, I say treat everyone equally, capitalize both, or lowercase both. But apparently that makes me an extremist. Anyways, today we're going to read this to keep any politics out of it, but I am a massive lover of Greek mythology. So there is that. I do have a bias, just so you know. A British university has issued a trigger warning to undergraduate students studying Greek mythology, advising them to reach out to support services should they find the material distressing. Okay, already I'm a little confused here because Greek mythology, I don't get it. Support services for what? Well, let's find out more. The University of Exeter in the United Kingdom has advised undergraduates studying Homer's ancient poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, masterpieces, the two major Greek epic poems, that if the subject is causing distress, they should feel free to deal with it in ways that can help. Exempli gratia, leave the classroom, contact well-being services, and or talk to the lecturer. Okay, I'd like to first begin by commenting very briefly on this. Leave the classroom. So let me, excuse me. Point number one. Leave the classroom is something that all students at university and college students can do anyways. It's not middle school where you have to go, teacher, can I go to the bathroom? It's university students. People do it all the time. You stand up and leave the classroom. It's a given. In any university, if you've ever attended a university in your life, it's just how it works. You've got like 30 students, you've got 100 students depending on the class, and students are free to stand up and leave at any point during the class, during the lecture. That's just how it is. You don't need to tell them because that's obviously something that all students know at any university around the world. And no one is going to say anything because we're not dealing with children. Point number two, talk to the lecturer. So about this one, I want to read the next paragraph just to understand what they're on about, but I do have something to say about this point too. Anyways, the advice has been particularly strong to students taking the module Women in Homer, who at the beginning of the course, good luck if you're studying women in ancient Greece in general, rather than, but whatever, of the course are warned that they may find the material uncomfortable and challenging, particularly the references to R-word, infant mortality, and violence. Okay, finally we are framing it. Well, let me respond to that. So infant mortality, then you're going to have a problem taking any module before the advent of modern medicine, antibiotics. So if you study the Middle Ages, you need trigger warning. If you study classical antiquity, trigger warning. Any classroom that deals with Stone Age, Mesolithic, Paleolithic, Neolithic, Infant mortality was a massive problem, which is one of the reasons why mortality rate in general have lower percentages, because infant mortality plays into the averages whenever we study that. So infant mortality, then why aren't you issuing, makes it a ridiculous reason to give a trigger warning to Greek mythology if you don't also give a trigger warning to anything that isn't modern history, like recent modern history, in fact. When it comes to SV and the R word, before YouTube demonetizes this video, of course, I don't want to be a contrarian a priori. I do want to try and understand where they're coming from. If I was a lecturer, and yes, I have 10 years of experience in teaching, so if I was a lecturer at a university, for instance, and a student came to me, male or female, and they told me, Professor, I love this module, but there is the whole section about those mentions of the R word or SV, or like it makes me suffer, it makes me feel terrible inside. I tried, but I have panic attacks, and I really want to do it. I want to take the test. I love it because I like everything else. I like the Greek gods. I like the mythology. But there's just this thing. Is there anything we can do when it comes to the actual? Could you tell me when the lessons are that deal with this? And I might not attend because I don't want. I'd be like, yeah, absolutely, not a problem. Not a problem. I wouldn't even investigate. I would be decent about it. I would read in between the lines, and I would understand absolutely this student has this problem. I understand. So I would not have a problem with this. So it's not that I don't want to be sensible when it comes to very specific topics. It's just that my question is, why are you singling out ancient Greek mythology? If SV or infant mortality are enough for this university, for this academic institution, to trigger warnings to the undergraduate, how is it possible that they're not triggering warning for, say, a modern history class on World War II? What about the SS and what they did? What about Stalin? Are you triggering warning to what Stalin did in the Gulag? Are you going to issue how do you define infant mortality or SV as something that requires a trigger warning in the context of Greek mythology appears, but not any other mythology? They are all full of it. I mean, are you going to issue a trigger warning in population extermination, war? Are you going to issue trigger warnings for that? Are you going to issue trigger warning to any conflict? Slavery? What about all the slavery in classical antiquity? Are you going to issue trigger warning when it comes to slavery present, for example, in Africa, pre-colonial? Are you going to issue trigger warnings for Japan and Unit 747, I think it was? Are you going to issue trigger warning every time there is an unalivement, which means the entirety of human history? Why are they singling out Greek mythology if they are? That's the real question that I'm going to ask, and I hope that the article is going to tell us. Because if they're doing this on a level field for every culture, for every nation, for every people, then at least I would appreciate the consistency. I still think it would be useless as a trigger warning. But then again, if you want to do the trigger warning and you apply it equally throughout the entirety of the spectrum of the academic curricula, then at least I would respect that. But if you're singling out Greek mythology, then you're going to have a problem with me. Since this isn't an isolated case, but as we were reading, universities have been making insane statements like the two previous videos, link in the description. Since this is not happening in isolation, then I'm starting to think, are you trying to do a political move here? And if that's what you're doing, the university shouldn't do that. Get more on that later. Let's continue reading. The details of the advice given to undergraduates studying the works of Homer at Exeter University were published in an exclusive report by British Mail Online and were obtained under Freedom of Information laws. British University criticised for using trigger warning on Greek mythology. I would say rightly so at this point, with the information that I've been given. Critics have been blasting the University of Exeter for issuing the warnings, yet it wasn't until Saturday night when even former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, a fan of Homer's works at the classics, openly slammed the move, calling the warnings absurd and adding that they must be withdrawn. And then several professors at British University have also slammed Exeter's move. Okay, so let me say this, just to show you that I'm fair. We will read what the politician said. Not that I know much about British political parties and their representatives. I don't know the current policies. I don't know their economic takes. I don't know their approaches to societal levels, but we don't speak about politics on this channel, so I will read it for context, but I don't particularly care what any politician has to say. I am, however, very interested to see what professors have to say. Let me tell you why I make that distinction. I make that distinction because an approach to something that concerns the public like this and addressing it has polar opposite effects to a politician and to a professor. For a politician, it is an advantageous move to make a public statement when it comes to anything like this. The reason being that whether they latch themselves or connect themselves to a specific statement supporting it, or whether they are attacking or contrasting a statement like it's in this case, it is advantageous to a politician because they can gain support because of it, which means that they have an incentive to speak up, and therefore I don't know if they actually mean it or if it's a move. And it takes me a very long time to finally figure out if I actually like a politician or I trust a politician more than I distrust them, as opposed to instead a politician that I'm thinking, no, I really don't like this guy/woman. And as I say, it takes time to vet them because I cannot just trust them a priori that they actually mean it, because they have something to gain from speaking publicly against or in favor of an issue of public concern. But when it comes to a professor instead, they have everything to lose. You see, if a professor takes a stance on a matter of public interest, they could lose funding, they could lose their job, budget resources could be reallocated away from their specific sector. Thus, when a professor makes a stance in favor or against an item of public interest like this, then I'm more inclined to be like, okay, let me see what the professor has to say. So I'm going to read it all for context, but we're going to focus on what the professors are saying, not the politicians. So Mr. Boris Johnson says, are they really saying that their students are so wet, so feeble-minded, and so generally namby-pamby, that they can't enjoy Homer? Johnson said. Okay. Several professors at British universities have also slammed Exeter's move. Frank Furendi, emeritus professor of sociology at the University of Kent, told Mail Online. Let's see. Open quotes. Poor old Homer. A university that decides to put a trigger warning on Homer's Iliad and Odyssey has become morally disoriented to the point that it has lost the plot. It is obvious that this university is unaware of the temporal distinction between the present and the past and regards these foundational mythologies as if they are contemporary statements about the world. I don't particularly care about the morally disoriented statement, but I do absolutely agree with the professor. What he's doing here is that he's saying they are guilty of modernism. That is what I attack constantly and viciously and relentlessly on this channel. Modernism as applied to the ancient past is not supposed to be found at a university. It's like the one place where you shouldn't find modernism, you should find professionals. So I agree with the Professor Emeritus. The Iliad and the Odyssey were written in the 7th or 8th century BC by ancient Greek poet Homer. They had been inspired by the mythic Trojan War, and they are two of the oldest works of literature still read by modern audiences. Also, once again, look at how silly-minded the position of the university is. So they have a problem with the way women were treated in Homer, but they don't have a problem with the war? I mean, if you're gonna do a trigger warning, how are you not doing a trigger warning when it comes to the massacre that happened? Okay. The Iliad was set towards the end of the Trojan War in the siege final weeks and depicts a fierce rivalry between King Agamemnon and Achilles, a celebrated warrior. The Odyssey, which in 2018 was voted the greatest story ever written by experts around the world in a poll by BBC Culture, follows the Greek hero Odysseus, well, watch the BBC delete that, king of Ithaca, on his 10-year journey home after the end of the war. Can we take a moment to say thank you to the Greeks and Greece for producing such an amazing amount of literature, mythology, art, culture? Can we do that? All right, splendid. Thank you, Greeks. Jeremy Blacks, the author of A Short History of War, a book in which he examines war as a global phenomenon, told Mail Online that, open quotes, trigger warnings proliferate like knotweed, and the latest on women in Homer and Exeter can surely only be a parody. Black added that, open quotes, Homer's work on the Trojan War inherently focuses on violence and is realistic precisely because heroism and cruelty are shown to be related. There's no need for the emotional incontinence of walking out of lectures. Okay, so I agree with the rest, but at the very end, just to be fair, there is nothing wrong if a student does feel uncomfortable with any given subject, maybe for personal reasons. So I don't think you need, I agree with the rest, but I don't think you need to sort of laugh at or belittle if a student needs to leave the room. That's okay. It happens. It always happens for a million reasons. I mean, we're okay with students leaving the room for a freaking free cigarette. Students leave the room to go to the restroom. So a student can leave the room if whatever is being discussed hits too closely to home. Once again, I don't have a problem with that. I do have a problem, however, with how silly this is, since they don't appear to do any other trigger warning when it comes to other things. That's why it looks political in nature. It looks like there is a message. What's the message? What's the message, university? At least have the courage to stand up and say it. Exeter University stands by its move to issue the warning. Okay. A spokesman, spokesman it is. A spokesman for the University of Exeter told Mail Online that the university, open quotes, strongly supports both academic freedom and freedom of speech. Well, here's the thing. I'll comment on this in a second. And accepts that this means students may encounter views and content that they may find uncomfortable during their studies. Yeah, okay, this has nothing to do with freedom of speech. So, I am a huge supporter of freedom of speech. I've always said this, it is my public stance. Freedom of speech, absolutely. People should be allowed to speak their mind. So, if they support freedom of speech, I'm like, great. But in this case, what does freedom of speech has to do with a student saying that it's because they are allowed to say it, I guess? I'm like, yeah, of course, but it's the university as an institution is being selective in an unfair manner when it comes to ancient Greek mythology, as opposed to what? Ancient African mythology, which they don't seem to be putting any issue when it comes to ancient Rome. What about the Romans? As a fanboy of Romans, I'm going to say, why aren't you finding Roman stuff? Because there is plenty of violence in Rome too, so why aren't you triggering issue warnings against the Romans? Why only the Greeks? What about Japanese history and culture? That's what the problem is, not freedom of speech. Freedom of speech, absolutely. In fact, I think the university should be allowed to say this, but I can use my own freedom of speech to tell you it's nonsense. Okay, that's how freedom of speech works. That's how freedom of speech works. When it comes to academic freedom, I can flip it around. It should be the academic freedom of an educational institution to be able to teach ancient Greek mythology without having the need to put a trigger warning like such. That would be academic freedom. You do not have academic freedom if you have to remove the word Anglo Saxon because it offends, if you have to police your language, like the one in Canada, if you have to say, oh, no, trigger warning for ancient Greek because it could be bad, guys. All of this to do what? To allow the students to stand up and leave the classroom. They already could do that, so you're not fighting the good fight. You're not helping the students in need. They can already do that, and it never was a problem. It never was a problem. The spokesman added that the content warning open quotes, help ensure students who may be affected by specific issues are not subjected to any potential unnecessary distress. They don't need to be. I was saying, they don't need to be. No, I know exactly what this is. I'll tell you what this is. This is virtue signaling. It's all it is. It's virtue signaling because if they really cared about the students, as I do, I care about the students. If they really cared, then this would have been a systematic approach that would have engaged with anything that students may find concerning at a psychological level. Not just ancient Greece, not just women, how they are treated in or SV, or how women were treated specifically by Homer, who in context, not to mention that a lot of the stuff is fictional anyways, so how is fictional violence requiring a trigger warning, but real violence, say the history of World War II, doesn't? Why aren't the nukes that were exploded in Japan, how do they not require? I mean, it includes violence against women, I suppose, because they got melted. But that doesn't require trigger warning, because you're doing virtue signal. You don't actually care for the students. And that's why I don't like that. Regardless, thank you very much, number ones, for watching. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Stand up for the truth and stand against nonsense. But don't get too mad. We don't want toxicity. We want good stuff. Bye. If you appreciate my content so far and wish to help ensure my ability to continue to tell it how it is, regardless of any possible backlash, please support this channel on Patreon. Any support helps me and my team of academics keep the channel strong and gives us the means to fight back against the political rewriting of history. Stand with us, form the wall, defend the truth.